We're going to be doing alien abduction stories today. The truth is out there. Stay woke. Amy Rylance, then 22, her husband Keith and her friend Petra were at the Rylances' home in Gundia, Australia. In October 2001, Petra was woken up at 11:15 and went into the living room, where she was horrified to find Amy being carried in a sleeping position out through the window on a beam of light to a huge ship outside. Petra woke Keith, but by the time they entered the room, Amy was gone. The curtain was torn and the bushes outside were burnt. The pair phoned the police, who struggled to take the claim seriously. However, around 90 minutes later, Keith received a phone call from a woman in Mackay, Queensland, an 8-hour drive from Gundia. She said she was with Amy, who was in the hospital dazed and dehydrated. No one could explain how she had traveled such a distance in such a short time. Amy was uninjured, except for red marks on her upper thighs and heels. She said she remembered lying on the bed with tall figures leaning over her, reassuring her and taking samples from her. When she was found, her body hair had grown considerably, suggesting she had been gone for much longer than a few short hours she was missing. Number 2. Jesse Long was just 5 years old when he was abducted by aliens for the first time. He was exploring in the woods with his brother, and when they came upon a round structure in a clearing, a tall figure appeared and paralyzed the boys. Jesse remembers being taken into the craft and placed on a cold table. He could feel the figures around him poking and prodding his legs. Over the next few years, Jesse said he was abducted repeatedly. He claims he was experimented on, including having sperm extracted that was used to crossbreed with a female alien. In 1990, he says the aliens presented him with a baby, which they said was his. He also met 9 more of his hybrid children. Jesse, now 65, says he knows many people won't believe his story, but insists he is telling the truth. Number 3. Barney and Betty Hill were driving back from a holiday in Niagara Falls in September 1961. They noticed a light in the sky which got closer, eventually appearing as a huge shape hovering above the car. Barney got out, and through his binoculars he saw 11 humanoid figures in shiny black uniforms and capes watching them. Terrified, the couple drove off. However, they both claimed to have experienced a buzzing sensation, and when they finally arrived home at dawn, the 4-hour journey had taken 7 hours. The Hills' clothes were torn in strange places, and Betty found a mysterious pink powder on her dress. She began having intense dreams about the experience, in which skin samples were taken from her and the needle thrust into her navel. Later she drew a star map, which she said had been shown by the aliens. Barney and Betty Hill were respected in their community. Barney was involved in civil rights movement, and Betty was a social worker. No one had any reason to suspect that they were lying. Number 4. In October 1957, a Brazilian farmer named Antonio Villaboas saw a red star in the sky. The light got closer until he could make out a spaceship, which landed on 3 long legs in his field. He tried to escape on his tractor, but was grabbed by a small humanoid with blue eyes. Boas claimed he was taken aboard the ship and covered in a gel-like substance. He was then forced to have intercourse with a female creature with bright red pubic hair, so as to produce a human-alien hybrid to be raised by aliens. Boas was eventually escorted from the ship and arrived back on Earth 4 hours later. He had burns on his body, nausea, lesions and headaches, and a doctor diagnosed him as suffering from radiation sickness. Boas later trained to become a lawyer and stuck to his story his entire life. Man, dude fucked a Martian once. Number 5. In November 1975, 6 forestry workers in Arizona reported seeing their colleague Travis Walton blasted through the air in a beam of light from a UFO above the trees. The workers reported Walton missing, and police suspected he had been murdered by their group, who had disposed of his body. But 5 days later, Walton reappeared, claiming he had been abducted by aliens. He described walking on a table, surrounded by small figures in orange gowns. Their skin was smooth and chalky, and their bald heads were too large for their bodies. They had huge, shiny brown eyes. Walton escaped from the aliens and fled through the ship. He eventually met more humans on board, dressed in blue uniforms. They didn't speak to him, but forced a gas mask on his face so he lost consciousness. Walton claims the next thing he remembers was walking up, shaky and confused, on a roadside in Arizona. Number 6. This was one of the earliest reported alien encounters and was written up in the Stockton Evening Mail. In 1896, Colonel H.G. Shaw was traveling with a companion by horse and carriage towards Lodi in California. Suddenly, their horses startled, and they saw three strange beings at the side of the road. The creatures were slender and humanoid in appearance, but 7 feet tall and bald, except for a velvet soft down that covered their bodies. They didn't speak, but warbled to one another as if they were chanting. They held lamps that shone unnaturally brightly and seemed to be formed from some sort of glowing mineral. Shaw said the creatures possessed a strange and indescribable beauty. The aliens attempted to lift Shaw, and he felt they wanted to carry him away, but he was too heavy for them. Eventually they moved away, floating just above the ground. Shaw followed them until they reached a huge cigar shape in the air. The creatures flew up to it, disappearing inside a door. The ship departed and was soon lost from sight. Number 7. Hilary Porter, from Wales, claims to have been abducted by aliens countless times through her life. At 5 years old, she remembers playing in the long grass behind her home. A reptilian alien appeared. It had scaly skin and black holes for a nose and mouth. It was 5 feet tall and exceptionally strong. It grabbed Hilary and carried her onto the disc-shaped ship. Porter was stripped and placed on a bed, then prodded with various instruments. At that point, she says she blacked out. Years later, while driving with her husband, she says the car suddenly pulled up at a garage, and they both have no memory on how they got there. She was undressed later that day. She had triangular red suction mark on her stomach. After all of her abductions, Porter suffers piercing migraines, and she has sometimes woken with bruises, scratches, and even bloodstains on her clothes. Porter, who once worked at the Ministry of Defense, has made drawings based on the memories of her alien encounters. She says the beings communicate with her telepathically and have been sent to extract human genetic material on Earth. Number 8. One night in February 1988, Peter Corey was asleep in bed when he felt something grab him by the ankles. He experienced pins and needles run through his body, and he was paralyzed. He saw 3 beings around his bed. They were gold with slits for mouths and large black eyes. Corey said he was aware the creatures communicated with telepathy. They inserted a needle into Corey's head, and he blacked out. Corey's second alien encounter was more disturbing. During this one, female aliens with long, white blonde hair came to his bed and engaged with him sexually. After the encounter, he found a long blonde hair tied around his penis. Corey claims that DNA analysis found the hair was biologically different to human hair, and he is certain his encounter was with extraterrestrial life forms. Number 9. Whitley Strieber was already a well-known author on aliens and UFOs when he experienced his first alleged contact in 1985. Sleeping in his isolated cabin in New York State, he was awoken by his alarm. He rushed outside to check what was going on, only to find a creepy, motionless creature standing before him. He then claims to have been taken to a mysterious ship where the creatures began experimenting on him. Strieber recalls long needles being stabbed directly into his brain. He has never been the same man since that night. Number 10. Did you know the popular Men in Black movies were actually based on allegedly true stories in 1967? A guy called Robert Richardson was driving at nighttime in Toledo, Ohio, when he hit a strange metallic object, which then vanished. He stopped his vehicle and was stunned to find a small piece of metal that he figured came from the object he hit. He took it home, and a few days later, he claimed that 2 men wearing black hats and sunglasses came to his house and threatened him until he gave up the object. Number 11. This happened in Reno, Texas, a town so small you could drive through it and not know you're there. On the 4th of July in 2010, I was 11. My family went to my grandparents' little property to have a fireworks show. All of the neighbors were also shooting off fireworks, so it was a huge, beautiful show on the entire street. I'm a kid, so I'm having a great time with a sparkler or something like that, and I noticed all the adults looking up. All the fireworks had stopped from all the neighbors, and everyone saw a perfect triangular-shaped flying object flying slowly over us. Bright red on the bottom, like an electric stove when it burns on high, and 2 exhaust pipes burning flames out of the back. It flew slowly until it was out of sight. Everyone in my family saw it, and so did the neighbors. We all think that they were watching the show. See, we were about an hour away from Fort Worth, where the Carswell Air Force Base is. The famous alien ship crash at Roswell, New Mexico was brought to Carswell, so we have a lot of activity. Number 12. My mom was also 11 years old when her dad was transferred to the Carswell base. He was in the Air Force. They lived about 10 minutes away from the base. One night, they were driving home from my great grandma's house in Oklahoma. It was a 4-hour drive. They were almost halfway through the drive. My mom and her two siblings in the back seat, and her dad was driving. Her mom was on the passenger side. Her parents look up at a bright light coming down in on them from the sky. My mom says she felt so tired and she fell right asleep. Her next conscious memory was her parents driving like normal and them arriving home shortly after. They all go inside and call my great grandma, telling her they were home safe now. She didn't believe them because they had arrived 2 hours earlier than they were supposed to. She thought they were playing a joke on her. She asked them to prove it by making the dog bark. My grandma started questioning them and it triggered the memory of the light on the road. It's all they could talk about for weeks. If you guys made it this far, I appreciate it. These stories about aliens really make you think sometimes. There's a lot of people alive that believe aliens exist. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. I'll see you next week.